Give it up for Big Ten Commissioner Jim Delany.
Thank you.
All right. And he was gracious enough to join us in one of his last public appearances. We thank you. We thought it was such a special occasion. There'd be two of us asking questions. So my friend from Learfield IMG College CEO Greg Brown and I are going to spend the next 30 minutes asking some questions. Greg says he's going to interrupt Commissioner Delany if you're not getting the answers you want. Maybe. So let's start with this. 31 years at the Big Ten. Not to age you, but I guess it's 71 years old. Why now?
You know, that's a good question. It just feels right is probably the right answer. I had contracts over the last 5 or 6, 7 years that had end dates, and I would talk to our board, and if there was something that was going on that was interesting and I was feeling good, I would say, hey, let's roll it another couple of years. And then as we approached meetings last year, I was talking to the leadership of the conference, and I said, you know, I think 2020 would be a good time for me to conclude. And they said, well, there's some things going on. Could you do 2 more years? And I felt really comfortable in saying no. You know, I think it's a good time. 30 years or 31 years, a chance to see a lot, to do a lot, to be healthy. And we've got a great staff. We've got Kevin Warren is going to be another great leader in college sports, but also I think in particular for the Big Ten. So it just seemed like the right time, and so the president said, if you don't want to be here, and I said, well, don't take it that way.
Right.
But if you don't want to be here, let's move on. And so we've really moved on in a way, and feel really good about it.
Well, Greg's got the next question, but for the audience, I think just January 1 is your last day.
Right.
Your wife's here with us, Kitty. So the plan is after January 2nd, what?
So January 1 is the last day of work at the Rose Bowl, which is not a bad place.
Not a bad place.
To finish. January 2 is the first day of retirement, so I will be around the pool at the Langham Hotel. And after resting at the pool for a day, we'll then fly to Nashville, Tennessee. We're starting a new phase in Nashville, Tennessee.
So you're moving to Nashville.
Yes, we are.
Good for you. And I was going to relax for all of 8 hours by the pool.
Yep,
Right at
and
it.
we're moving on.
Greg?
So 31 years.
Yep.
Amazing amount of change over the course of the 31 years.
Yep.
As you look back, what are a few of the key moments of that tenure that you really reflect on and feel like they are real pivotal points,
Yep.
either in your career and/or major impacts in the game?
You know, probably the first thought I would go to would be the call I received from Stan Eikenberry, who was then the president of Illinois and a former senior vice president at Penn State. And then it was in the summer of '89, and he said that he had received, signals from Penn State that they were interested in talking to us. And so I had been there all of about 55 days. It wasn't really part of any strategic plan, but I met with the presidents in October, and they said, what do you think? And I said, well, Penn State's a great institution, a contiguous state. They face east. 11 is not the number you think about when you think about a conference. It's a prime number, but it's not the number that you think about. And so I was fully supportive. We didn't execute it very well because the presidents had just incorporated the conference the previous year, and they were in control, and I think they exercised that control, but there was a pushback from traditionalists, the last people to learn, or sometimes not the first people to embrace the change, but we worked through that. We learned to do it better in future years, but that would be the first. And then there was another moment years later, but it was 9/11, and 9/11 affected everyone in this country in a profound way. I happened to be in Philadelphia that morning, and we'd seen the one tower get hit, and then we got onto the plane. We thought it was an accident. And then we got onto the plane, and I saw the stewardesses crying, and I realized this was not an accident. So we taxied back, and I had to figure out how to get back to Chicago. And there was no airplane, there was no rail traffic, and so I was able to get to Penn State, and then we commandeered a car from the pool, and we drove overnight. And the next day they immediately canceled the Virginia-Penn State game, which was on Thursday night. But we had a slew of games, and we had to work through that. And it's sort of a long story, but what it really taught me was, at the time, we tried to customize the decision depending on the circumstances at each place. So we're playing someone from San Diego, you know, hey, they have to fly across the country, that goes out. But if we're playing Indiana State, that can go on. So we tried to make those decisions on a one-off basis to do what we thought was right for each institution. That was a mistake. Not only, and we were in contact with the NFL and Major League Baseball and people in government, and we were trying to, what I would describe as thread a needle that we shouldn't have tried to thread.
Right.
Because what happened was we canceled 4 or 5 were going to go on. The governors of the states in the Midwest said, well, why is Indiana playing but Ohio State is not and Illinois is? And we couldn't explain that. This is bigger than threading the needle in order to have some competition occur. And so they talked to presidents and governors talked, and none of the games went on, and that was the right thing. I think both coasts, if I recall correctly, canceled games. The people in the Midwest and the South tried to thread the needle, but eventually nothing was played, and that was the right outcome. But I said to myself that the next time I have an opportunity to do what I think is right in a crisis moment, I'm not going to try to thread the needle. I'm just going to do what I think I need to do. And you know, I've had a few opportunities where I've had to do that, but you have to go through that. It was all done with good intent, but as a leader, you have to understand that not every decision can be managed that way. Sometimes you just have to step up and do what you think is right for the group, and that's what people expect of leaders, I think.
Was there another instance where then, learning that lesson, you did step up and do what you felt was right?
There absolutely was, you know, and we had a terrible situation occur in Minnesota. We had a track and field event, and there was a young man by the name of Kevin Dare. And Kevin was a pole vaulter, and he had a fatal accident in our championship. He went up, he lost his balance, he came down, he lost his life. And so I immediately got up there. And so you have all these last chance opportunities for young people to qualify for the NCAA. So you had some coaches and some athletes who wanted to participate. You had some other people who felt like there was too much shock and trauma. So I talked to the coaches a few different times, and I said, I want to let you know I'm thinking about canceling this event. But I'm not going to do it until we talk through it. And I said, well, we've talked for an hour, and you haven't convinced me. I said, I'm going to cancel the event, but we'll go another half hour and see if you can convince me. But eventually, we canceled the event. We had a memorial service there. The athletes from all 11 schools came together. The Penn State team did a symbolic act around the pole that was involved with Kevin's death. And interesting, every one of those coaches came back at a later date and said, thank you for helping us resolve this issue. But it was done because I had been informed earlier that you can't resolve every issue by cutting the baby in half. And you know, the NCAA was really good about this because they allowed for the best times and the best performances, not the fact that we didn't have a championship to dictate access. I think the teams that were there and the students that were there began a healing process. And you know, so those two events taught me a lot about leadership and a lot about the need to strike out sometimes, but after listening, and make the decision. And so you could be wrong or you could be right, but there are times and places where I think that's what's expected.
So in the video that we all just looked at, so many really brilliant leaders are talking about how they view you, and in many cases sort of almost make reference to a mentor type relationship. Mm-hmm. As you look back and think about your own life, who were some of those mentors for you? Who did you model your leadership style or the way you looked at the world? Who were some of those people?
Yeah, I mean, I was fortunate to have a lot of that in my time. Couple of people that come to mind immediately were Dave Gavitt and Vic Bubas. Vic was the coach at Duke when I was playing. Then he went into administration at a fairly young age. Both Vic and Dave left coaching in their 40s.
Wow.
And then Dave became an athletic director, and then he became an Olympic coach, and then he moved on to the Celtics. But you know, the compensation, you don't see people leaving at the height of their careers in their 40s, but at that time the compensation was a different situation. But Dave was a tremendous mentor and friend. I knew of him. I watched his teams play, and then Vic was likewise a mentor, and I got a chance to work with both of them, as a commissioner in the Big Ten as well as in the Ohio Valley Conference. So they were friends, mentors, second fathers, terrific people. But I also had a chance to observe very successful people. And I always tell young people, don't be critical, but never stop critiquing. So you don't have to make every mistake yourself. You can watch others, learn from others. You can see what they do well. And if they do something well, you should reach out and congratulate them. And if they do something that, you can put yourself in that situation, learn from that. You don't have to be a critic to engage in the process of evaluation of others. So to be around, Dick Schultz, Gene Corrigan, Walter Byers, these were people who were leaders in the industry at that time. And so, early on, I got a chance to do that. I also, from the time I was about 26 to 30, I was an enforcement representative. And so I worked all over the country, but in that process, I met a Barry Switzer, a Bear Bryant, a Woody Hayes, a John Wooden, a Frank Cush. So, 25 to 30, I had a chance to work with individuals who were, national figures in our industry. And so I think that acclimated me to the dynamics of competition, and that was probably an experience. My dad said, "Why are you going to go to work at the NCAA?" I said, "I just want to be involved in sports and see where it leads." And he says, "What if it doesn't work out? What will you do then?" I said, "I'll go do something else."
So is the NCAA working out?
Well, 4.5 years it worked out for me.
Worked out pretty well.
Yeah.
When you talk about we're at football season, BCS to CFP, you happy as you leave your tenure? You happy with the progression of college football?
What I've learned is, I thought I didn't really like the computers. So the alternative to the computers are people.
They are.
And sometimes I don't really like people either.
You? Really?
My difficulty is if I don't get what I want, I'm not happy.
Right. You're fun to be around.
Yeah.
So that would be. Are you happier with this system?
Yeah, I think the system is improved. I mean, you have a lot of issues that you're trying to balance. College football has been on a trajectory since 1998, which is nothing but up in with regard to its popularity.
Right.
There's no doubt about that, and I think the BCS was part of that. I credit Kramer and Corrigan for getting us going in that direction. We collaborated with it because I could see the importance of taking that step. But what's been interesting to me is while there has been a growth in the game, I mean, it's pretty remarkable. Bowl season used to start on December 25th and end on January 1st. Today it starts on December 12th and goes to January 12th. And that's had a negative impact, in my view, on college basketball, which is also very important to all of us.
That's a good point.
And we've spent a lot of time in the last 5 years in particular of trying to bring basketball in November, December to a better place because the shadow of football is so powerful. And so between the Gavitt games and the ACC Challenge and going to 20 conference games and putting them earlier has really helped us in growing our basketball in those months. Dave Gavitt used to say basketball has a great idea on how to end the season, but not a very good idea on how to start it.
Yeah.
And I think we and others are moving in the right direction in that area because there's a fan base, they'll come out and they'll watch, but you have to give them something that they're interested in, and I think we're doing that now.
Talk about the impact of millennials on college sports and where that's headed.
Yeah, it's interesting that the consumption patterns are obviously different. A lot of us grew up going to the game or taking a 2-hour segment and watching it. And I think that just the general habit of younger people with regard to media, social media, linear, traditional media, is that they probably consume it in shorter portions. But to give you an idea of sort of the economics underlying the consumption habits, in 1990, Media to attendance was probably 10 to 1. $10 of attendance for every dollar of media. Today, it's probably, over the last 30 years, it's probably some of the larger contracts have grown at double-digit, compounded annually.
Right.
Okay? But the media dollars, at least in our conference, is 1.2 to 1. So we're engaging more people, more intensely, but if you're building a stadium, you'd probably go smaller rather than larger. And I still think there's going to be a challenge to keep that person, keep them involved. I think the games that we offer across a wide spectrum have entertainment value, where education, competition, and a level of entertainment. We need to recognize that. And today, I was looking at numbers yesterday. We had a BTN board meeting, and our third highest rated sport is women's volleyball.
Women's volleyball.
Women's volleyball.
After
football and basketball. Yep.
Yep.
And we know that, so we, schedule to that. It's a beautiful athletic event and great team sport and appealing.
And it's within a window that you can be comfortable with.
Yep, you got the rally scoring,
yeah,
and
exactly.
it's
it's going to end within a period.
It's amazing, and so that's being tracked, and so it's going to be marketed, and it's going to be done in a way that they can back and forth to school and not miss too much class. But you have to be aware of what people want to watch, and volleyball, women's volleyball is a great example of something that people are watching in large numbers. I think eventually lacrosse jumps into that. Our numbers up in hockey. Wrestling numbers are up. So we're doing, you're watching it and you're trying to provide it in a good context, but in a way that's responsive to taste of the day.
I got a great question, Greg, here from the audience that I want to get to, because I remember being really fascinated during expansion of Maryland, Rutgers, and the idea of like growing your footprint, going where the cable homes were, going east. And this question refers to that a little bit, Commissioner. Do you think cord cutting and streaming will finish the need to chase eyeballs and geographic expansion?
No.
You don't?
I think there is an outer limit to what a conference can be. And I'm not saying it's 14, it may be 16, but you have to look at this in a contextual way. The Big Ten was not only the first conference, but it was the largest conference demographically. And it had 10 members, which was large at the time in the 70s and the 80s. It had metropolitan areas. It had the benefits of migration from the east. It had manufacturing. It had agribusiness. It was dynamic. But as time has occurred, as over time people moved to the Sun Belt, there was growth in other areas. And we were pretty happy at 10, but we went to 11. It wasn't part of a strategic plan, except to the extent that you knew you were in Midwestern and you knew Penn State faced east. So I never thought it could in any way challenge who we were. But as other conferences got larger, remember the Big Ten was in 8 states, but the ACC was in like 4 states: Virginia, North Carolina, and Maryland and South Carolina. It was Middle Atlantic. The SEC was mostly deep Mid-South. The Pac-12 had moved into Arizona and Arizona State, but in pretty short order after Penn State, the SEC, the ACC, and beginning on the Pac-12 started thinking about second regions. Okay? And so when that happens, you look at your relative strength compared to the people you're competing with, not just for recruiting, but for students, for federal aid, and for media. And so while there were a rich number of cable homes in that area, for us, we were at the largest conference in the country with 55 million Americans in 1989. And then with Penn State, and then with Maryland, and with Rutgers and Nebraska, we went to 95 million. But you have to understand that the ACC has 100 million, and the Pac-12 has 100 million, and the SEC has 100 million. So at 95, we have parity with them. We don't have a distinct advantage, we just have parity. But before that, before anyone expanded, we had the largest at 55 to 60 million. So there is a competitive sense about it, and it's not only about cable homes, it's about recruitment of students and recruitment of student athletes and federal dollars. And that corridor from Northern Virginia to Southern Connecticut is probably the richest corridor in the country, not only with cable homes, but also with financial institutions, political institutions, and really good high school students.
And so you deem it a success, that move?
I do. I mean, I'm not saying in the 5-year period or the 10-year period it's going to be a competitive, because in the case of Rutgers didn't start where everybody else started, and they didn't have the inflow. Eventually, I think they'll be very successful. Maryland has had a fair amount of success, and certainly Penn State has won as many overall championships in other areas. And so I think we had a game last night where Penn State, with a one loss, defeated a number 4 ranked Maryland team. So you're going to see really good competition because there are a lot of great athletes and a lot of great students. And whether or not there's a movement towards greater or lesser cord cutting or more direct to consumer, we'll be fine, because relatively speaking, we're fine. And we've got a Big Ten diaspora. We've got 6 million Big Ten alums living all over the country.
All over the country.
And they all are married, and they all have 2 kids. So that's 25 million when you start.
Like your math.
Yeah.
So Jim, towards the end now, not entirely towards the end, just in terms of your tenure. Looking back, what would you say you would want your tenure, or how would you want your tenure to be remembered?
Respecting the tradition of the Big Ten, but also pivoting towards opportunity and innovation, 1. I think 2, that we grew quality educational opportunities, that we're more competitive athletically at the end than we were at the beginning. We had, 3 of the top 10 football teams in the country. We had 4 of the top 12 basketball. As we sit here, we have grown opportunities from 6,000 to 10,000. We've grown financial aid by a factor of 7 during that time frame. We've built a network. But most importantly, I think, is we compete on Saturday and we collaborate the other 6 days a week, both internally and externally. So if you talk to our partners, whether they're bowl partners or whether they're television partners, yeah, we can negotiate, but we can also partner. And in every relationship, everybody's got to benefit. Everybody's got to live with the agreements that are made, and then try to help the partners. And I think we've done that well. And I think the last thing, it's a pretty small thing, but it's just something that you don't sort of understand intuitively till you do it. And that is, you can lead, but unless you can figure out how to create ownership over that which is changing by the people who are supposed beneficiaries, you really can't sustain it. And so for us, while our presidents provide the North Star in terms of the things they're trying to achieve, our athletic directors and our coaches, where necessary, have sort of owned the decisions that we've made that are, in some cases, disruptive initially. The Big Ten Network was disruptive initially. Going to 20 games is disruptive initially. So there are things that we do that are hard to do, but they're definitely owned by the people who are their intended beneficiary.
The question here, before I do that, in that vein, Kevin Warren, I got a lot of respect for him.
Yep.
He's going to be great. Any words of wisdom or piece of advice that he should be prepared for that you kind of impart to him as he starts his journey?
Yeah, Kevin and I have spent a lot of time together, first this summer when he was finishing up the Vikings, and then over the last 2.5 months where we've shared office space. I've got a tremendous amount of confidence in his ability to lead. His experiences are rich, and where he comes from, as a student athlete, as a parent of student athletes, as a person with a deep insight into sports management, but also an educational background in law, in business. I think he's the right person at the right time. He's a different race. He's got a different voice, and I think he's going to have a profound impact in the discussion and dialogue that we're going to have over the next 5 years in and around college athletics.
Great. Question here from the audience. I like it. What was your proudest moment as a student athlete, and how did that experience impact your life and leadership of the future?
Probably coming from 9 points behind to beat Duke in the ACC championship.
That was the proudest?
That was probably the proudest moment.
Okay, that's fair. And how did that experience impact your life and leadership?
Well, it's funny, because Vic Bubiston and I became very close friends in later years. And I always used to say it was, great beating you in your last ACC championship game. I said, Charlie and I combined for 45 points. He had 40, I had 5.
There you go. Got to get a piece of that.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah.
That's great. You leave feeling good about the intercollegiate athletic ecosystem?
I think it's,
What's
you
a
know,
warning sign?
It's
What's
a, it's
any
a, I
cloud
think
on
it's
the
a tale
horizon?
of two cities. I think we have some of the most significant challenges we've had, but we also have some of the most robust opportunities for young men and young women. And so I expect things to be contested, for the next 3 to 5 years, but I think they'll eventually settle out. I think the institution of college sports is a powerful vehicle. In fact, one of the most powerful vehicles for good. I call it a CEO, choice, education, and opportunity. And I think when done well, the choice to go to college or not, the choice to professionalize yourself or not, the opportunity to compete on a national basis, but also the opportunity, because nobody can make anybody, to get a world-class education. And so I think we do things well. Do we do everything well? No. Do we need to modernize our rules? Yes. Is it going to be a difficult thing to achieve? Yes, but I think it will be achieved.
Got it. Greg?
So you worked with countless coaches, athletic directors, and presidents over your tenure. Who?
You want to know how many?
Well, yes. First off, how many?
So I was at a president's meeting last week, and Morty Shapiro's the president of Northwestern. He said, Jim, I've been here for 11 years. I've worked with 29 different presidents and chancellors. He said, how many have you worked with? I said, 70.
Wow.
He said, 70. I said, 70. I said, but also 69 ADs, 68 football coaches, and 55 basketball coaches. So yeah, you meet a lot of people with a lot of passion, personality, and it's pretty remarkable. You won't think about it as you go along, but when you look back, you realize you've touched and interfaced with a lot of great people.
Most challenging of all of those to have worked with?
Individuals?
Sure.
That's a great question. The most challenging. To be honest with you, ultimately, and there were some significant personalities and successful, passionate people. I think we found a way, really, to have a conversation that wasn't always great agreement or consensus, and I don't need to single anyone out, but it's amazing. Some are more difficult than the ones that have more notoriety. I think I'll just keep that answer to myself.
Wow, that's pretty good.
Somehow I knew that's where we were headed.
Maybe put it away for future reference.
I got it. All right, I got it.
What's future? What is next? Kilimanjaro, Everest?
Yeah, I'd like to. I've done Kilimanjaro,
Right.
and my wife and I did Machu Picchu, and
Right.
we've done some 14,000 peaks in this country, and I would like to get to base camp.
Is that right?
In Everest, probably in the fall of 2020.
Next fall?
Next fall.
Well, so, and the training and workout for that would be, constitute what?
It would be a lot of squatting and hinging and lifting and walking. And,
for you.
Yeah, I hope so.
No consulting, are you trying to get away? Or are you
No,
going to
no.
be on the fringes?
No, I think over the next 6 to 8 weeks, I'll make some decisions on that. I've got some friends here in New York. Sandy Montag is one friend, and we're talking a little bit. I've got some friends in Chicago who do some consulting work. I hope to do a little bit of writing and speaking, maybe some teaching. And so I hope to be active, but I also think it'll be a different phase from that perspective. I want to be available to Kevin, but I also want to get out of Kevin's way. So if he calls me, I would give him a response. But he's ready. The transition has been fabulous. He's met all of our partners. He's worked with our presidents, our ADs, and fellow commissioners. So he's ready to go, and I'm ready to answer any questions he may have. But if he doesn't have any questions, I'll be listening to some country music in Nashville.
There you go. I think Greg's going to finish. I have a couple quick hitters, and then Greg's going to finish it off. So my quick hitters would be one attribute that an aspiring athletic director needs to have.
Well, I think there are two.
Okay.
I think they have to have a desire and an ability to do the right thing at the right time. So that's integrity. And then the other thing, they have to be resilient. They have to have the energy to do the job, and then when things aren't going well, you need to get up and do it again. So I would say a sense of personal integrity and an energy level, a sufficient energy level, so that you pop up when you need to get back up. So those are the two things that I think you can be smart enough. I think there are a lot of smart people in the world, but I think an ability to try to do the right thing. If you don't do it, you have to correct it, but also to get up off the floor.
Any regrets?
You know, I think that really, not a regret per se, but I don't think you wake up one day and have it figured out. I think there are lots of mistakes that you go through in the process of learning how to lead. What triggers, what are the triggers necessary? So, you know, the example I gave you about 9/11, right? I learned from that. I think you have to learn from your mistakes, and I think you have to put yourself out enough that you have some mistakes. Because if you play it safe, you never really, you know, if you schedule, you can schedule your way to 20 wins, but that doesn't mean that you beat anybody. So when you put yourself out there, you take some risk. Sometimes you're right, sometimes you're wrong. And I think as time goes on, you learn to pick your fights more intelligently, and you really learn the need to bring others on board. The Big Ten Network may have been, I may have thought about it a lot more than others did a little bit earlier, but once it was explained, it never was my show. It was our institution show. They couldn't have gone through what they went through unless they owned it. So the importance of bringing other people with you on that ride, and you know, we were successful, but it wasn't guaranteed.
Right. Greg, take us home.
So, no interview with you would be complete. One of the most notable leaders in all of sport, without asking the question in college athletics, what's the future of the student athlete, and around the notion of name, image, and likeness, but not necessarily that descriptor, but what is the next generation of student athlete, and what's that look like?
I think that's the big question. You know, what I would hope is that as that gets resolved, and it will be resolved, that we don't lose the perspective, because that really will affect a certain smaller percentage in football and basketball, but there may be others who could benefit by that. That we don't lose the idea that this is about education, it's also about entertainment, and it's also about competition. And it's uniquely American. It doesn't exist in Europe or Africa or Asia. And our schools are uniquely American as well. There's so much choice, not only for athletes, but for others. And so we do need to modernize our rules. I think how that gets defined, I'd rather look at it like a collegiate licensing opportunity. So, for example, if you are a professional athlete, you have a union, maybe there's some group licensing. Maybe you can go out and you do your deal with Nike or Adidas, and that works. And then in the Olympic movement, you have Olympic licensing opportunities, but you don't go head to head under Rule 40 with the rings. So it's more limited. In the college world, I think there should be an opportunity. I understand why there hasn't been historically, but I think there will be one. But it's got to be done in a way that preserves the opportunities across the board for young people. It's got to be done in a way that respects Title IX and the opportunities that have been created for women. 30 years ago, it was 75-25 in the Big Ten. Today, it's 50-50. We've made progress here. And for 75 years, there were universities that excluded African Americans. That pretty much is the past. So in the future, I think we have to be distinguished from the professional ranks. We're the collegiate ranks. We're not the Olympic ranks. And we've got 500,000 students who are participating. We have 10,000 ourselves. So I hope that we can increase the quality, maintain the opportunity and the choice, and that we can have another 50 to 100-year run, because it is a special institution, but it does need to evolve and change. And we're going to need help. because I don't believe that you can have national championships, national competition, national recruitment without a national solution. And I do think there's a distinction between what we do and what happens in the NBA and the NFL. And I think that hopefully others will recognize that and will help us achieve what is a national solution to something that needs to be addressed both on the social justice side as well as on the competitive side and on the fairness side.
Well, I just want to say first thank you to my colleague Greg Brown, but we want to thank you for everything you've done for the sports business, everything you've done for student athletes, your leadership in intercollegiate athletics, and I know that I speak for the entire room when we wish you and your wife Kitty a great, great January 2nd on, and we'll be following and watching you. So give it up for Jim Delany.
Thank you. Thank you. Appreciate it. Thanks, Greg.
Jim.
Thank you. All right. Thank you.